All righty, clock on the pew says it is that time. And so we'll go ahead and get ready to get going. Let's see, prayer list this morning. Tommy Turner, I assume, had his second surgery Thursday. He had his first one Tuesday and had his second one Thursday. So hopefully they got his back situation taken care of and getting him ready to start being on the mend. Anybody else we need to be aware of? Jerry? Okay. Okay. I know last I heard, I haven't heard anything for a few days, from Riley Owens is that she is continuing her recovery. Still, of course, a long way to go after all she's been through. But I have talked to some folks that said she's been awake and has been talking to people. I have not heard anything about the arm. But I had not heard anything on the arm. Last I had heard, they were really worried about bacterial and infection issues, and so. But my understanding is she's been making some progress. Yes. Okay. Charles Hunt? Okay. Anybody else? If not, Mr. Pete, would you get us started this morning? All right, we're continuing on with our look at Exodus. God creates a nation. All right, I'm looking around the room. Has everybody in here seen the Ten Commandments? Brittany's going, no. Anybody else? Everybody else seen it? Of course, Britt, you're in that, you now make us all feel old here. Catherine? Okay, just making sure that, because you and Brittany are in that same range there. As we look at the 10th plague, if you've ever seen the movie, it's that green mist that goes around through all of Egypt. You see that green cloud that goes around. And so, we don't know really what it was like. Was it a visible spirit? Was it an invisible? We don't know. But the movie, the movie made it look like there was a green cloud that went around. We're into the 10th plague, and as we looked at last week, God had explained to Moses, all right, this is what's going to happen. He told him what's going to happen. He told them to be prepared. He said, look, when this happens, this is all going to happen quick. So everybody needs to be ready. And he talked about God's power is going to be on display. And we talked a little bit last week about, as you look through the plagues, you can see through the Egyptian gods that each plague sort of went after one of the Egyptian gods. Well, now this one now becomes almost, we talked last week, Pharaoh and God. This is it. This is where we're going to get down to it. And this is where God is going to show His supremacy. So this will demonstrate, what's getting ready to happen will demonstrate once and for all the might and superiority of God. As we talked about when we began this run here, Pharaoh was viewed as how in Egypt, or especially in his own mind. Pharaoh viewed himself as a god. Pharaoh was like, I'm it. And so this is going to be the point where even Pharaoh's house is going to be hit with this. The plague would also force the Egyptians to accept this reality and as a result beg them to leave. They've been through all of the plagues, even plagues that hit them and that did not hit the nation of Israel, the people. And now this one's going to hit, and the Egyptians are at this point, just go, just leave, get out, leave us alone. So this time, as Moses goes to Pharaoh one last time to tell him what's about to happen, Moses leaves in anger. We were getting toward the end of class last week when we talked about this. This time, it was Moses leaving in anger. We'd seen Pharaoh be angry and send Moses out, and Pharaoh had already told Moses once, if I see your face again, surely you will die. This time, Moses leaves in anger. And I think one of the reasons, as we touched last week, that Moses was leaving because he's thinking it did not have to be this way. There were going to be a lot of people to die, from the young to the old. Any male that was the firstborn in their family was going to die this night in Egypt. And Moses is thinking it didn't have to be this way. If Pharaoh had just humbled himself and released the people according to God's will, doesn't have to happen. So I think part of the thing is Moses is frustrated because he knows what's coming. And he doesn't have to be this way. Let's go to Exodus chapter 11 as we start moving forward. Yes. 75 people originally settled in Egypt. When they came in and they settled in Egypt, there was about 75. It's now going to be somewhere between an estimated 1 to 2 million are going to leave. Going to leave between 1 and 2 million. I was looking up some stuff this week, and the numbers estimated 1 to 2 million. Now you can see partially why the Egyptians didn't want this to happen. You got 1 to 2 million people, 500,000 to 1 million who are working for you? Slave labor? How much work are you going to have to account for yourselves when that free labor leaves? So there was a lot of political and social implications. In addition to the spiritual implications of what's going on here, there are a lot of political and civil implications for what's about to happen. And now it's even going to be worse because now you're going to have fewer Egyptians. You're going to have fewer cattle. This is a very impactful thing that's about to happen to the nation of Egypt. Not just from the spiritual standpoint, but from the actual physical day-to-day living. This is a serious thing that's about to happen to them. So if we look at Exodus 11 here, beginning of verse 9, the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, so that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go out of his land. So the Lord's telling him, this is Pharaoh's doing. This is Pharaoh's doing. And I think God may be trying to comfort Moses a little bit by saying, don't feel like you're the one who's bringing this on. You were my messenger. You were passing the message from me to Pharaoh, and all Pharaoh had to do was accommodate, follow my will. And even after plague 1, plague 2, plague 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, 9, at any point Pharaoh can end this, could he not? He's had chance after chance after chance to end this. And I think God's wanting to remind Moses he's had his time. Sounds like a message that we can still take to live by today, isn't it? We have had time after time. People are getting time after time and chance after chance. At some point, the time runs out. And we've hit the point now here for Egypt and Exodus that it's time over. It's time over. So God's, I think, trying to comfort Moses a little bit, and he assures Moses that Pharaoh is the one responsible. You know, you're not the one that's making all this happen. There's no action that you're taking that is punishing all these people. This is the choice of one man. And this is the choice of Pharaoh. It's not your responsibility or doing. However, through the king's hard-heartedness, God has been able to demonstrate to all the nations the supreme power of God of the Israelites. This shows us, even through things that look to be bad and things that are disastrous, that God can work through them. And it's going to show, but it's going to come through something that's really bad. You know, Romans 8:28 tells us we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. That doesn't necessarily mean that God causes lots of bad things to happen, but any bad thing that happens, God can be working through it. That's like when you look at what happened with Hurricane Katrina. God didn't target New Orleans and say, boom, I want to hit that city. But through the natural occurrence of a hurricane, there were opportunities for God to be glorified, for God's people to glorify him, for his name to be glorified by things that were done. That's what we're looking at here in Romans, is not that God does bad things so his glory can be made, but that through any situation God can be glorified. And that any situation can be turned to bring glory to him. Sometimes it's not easy for us to see that and understand that. But it can be used for his glory. And what's about to happen here in Exodus is he's going to show the power and the might and glory of God. Especially, it's going to show it to his people as he sets them free. So now let's look at what happens here. He starts before the event. He tells them about preparing for the Passover. Let's go to Exodus chapter 12. And we'll start with verses 1 and 2 here. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month is to be the beginning of months for you. It is the first month of your year." What's God doing here for them? What is he doing here? Giving them a new start and setting up their calendar. You know, he's creating, what do we observe? You know, we observe July 4th as what? The birth of the nation. This is about to be the birth of a nation here. So he's setting up their calendar, beginning with the birth of their nation. It is creation of a nation. There is a birth event, and the birth event for the Jewish people would be their freedom from Egyptian slavery. How long had they been here? I heard somebody. Long time. Think about how many generations had known nothing but bondage to the Egyptians. They had been in slavery 430 years. That's what, 180 longer than we've been a nation. Think about that. 430 years ago would have been, if we subtracted from where we are now, would have been 1596. Man, there wasn't much here at that point in time, was there? 1596. Think about that. We're talking about that kind of time frame. There was no future for them in Egypt, was there? If they stayed in Egypt, what was going to happen? They were going to be slaves. They were going to be slaves. They were going to be under a paganistic system. There was no future for God's people in Egypt. None. You know, we're not told. I think there may have been. You have to figure they had some relationships with some of those people. Now, I don't know that. I don't know, maybe they weren't allowed. But you have to wonder if there were some of the Egyptians that said, can we go with you? Because if you've been that long, 430 years in a country, you have to figure there are some families, even with the slavery, that were close. But the Egyptians saw them, mostly the Egyptians saw them as vermin. And they actually tried to eliminate them several times. Hey, we got slaves. It was, whatever. They're not real people. That's the bad thing about slavery in situations like that. You look at someone as less than someone else. It's easier to abuse somebody. It's easier to look down on somebody if you view them as less than you are, or as less than human. One of the great problems in our culture today is that we try to identify certain groups as lesser people than us. And when you do that, it's easier to hate. It's easier to discard people. They were despised by the Egyptian people, so there was no encouragement to assimilate into Egyptian culture. They weren't trying to say, hey, why don't you become like us Egyptians, worship our Egyptian gods, and be like us, make money like us? There was none of that. The Egyptians simply viewed them as slaves, as an end to a means. They were just used. And let's mention this, they were also afraid of them, weren't they? There was enough of them that part of the problem here was they were afraid. They were afraid that the Israeli people, the Jewish people, they were afraid they would jump up and bind with another nation. And then they were afraid that they would work with this other nation and they would overthrow Egypt. There were that many of them that they were afraid. This was just a situation that had really no good end. And then God begins by giving them a calendar, and He gives them a birthday. This event is the birth of the nation. Now, as we'll see going forward in Exodus, now that we get the birth of a nation, we've got to find a place for that nation to be. But the nation is born here. The Jews now had a calendar. Previously, they had a calendar which was largely an agricultural calendar. Sort of like their version of the old farmer's almanac. You plant at this time, you harvest at this time, you plant this crop at this time, you harvest. They had a calendar, but it was mainly an agricultural calendar. God is getting ready to give them a calendar of life and faith. The sacred sequence begins when God frees them from Egypt and commemorates this birth of a nation with the initial feast called Passover. First feast that people have, Passover. So from now on, what was normally the 7th month would now become the 1st month of the year, because it would be the time that they were reborn as the congregation of God. It says here, this month is to be the what? The beginning of months for you. This is your calendar. Your calendar starts with this event. This is the beginning. Everything else is based on and comes forward from this. It is the first time, too, that they are referred to as the congregation of Israel, an organized community of His people. First time they're called community of His people. Every time they looked at their calendar in the future, they were reminded not only of the birth of the nation, but the manner of that birth. Not only will they remember that they're a nation, they will remember what happened and how it came to be. This is a momentous, huge occasion. All right, let's go forward and look at verse 3, beginning of verse 3, going through verse 13. It says, "Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month they must each select an animal of the flock according to their father's families, one animal per family. If the household is too small for a whole animal, that person and the neighbor nearest his house are to select one based on the combined number of people. You should apportion the animal according to what each will eat. You must have an unblemished animal, a year-old male. You may take it from either the sheep or the goats. You are to keep it until the 14th day of the month. Then the whole assembly of the community of Israel will slaughter the animals at twilight. They must take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses where they eat them. They are to eat the meat that night. They should eat it roasted over the fire, along with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or cooked in boiling water, but only roasted over fire. Its head as well as its legs and inner organs. You must not leave any of it until morning. Any part of it left until morning you must burn. Here is how you must eat it. You must be dressed for travel, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. You are to eat it in a hurry. It is the Lord's Passover. I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night and strike every firstborn male in the land of Egypt, both people and animals. I am the Lord. I will execute judgments against all the gods of Egypt. The blood on the houses where you are staying will be a distinguishing mark for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. No plague will be among you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt." All right, so as we're looking there, beginning at verse 3, what first thing comes to your mind? And I will tell you, first thing comes to mind. Man, there's a lot of details here. There are a lot of stipulations on how to do this. Got to roast it. Can't boil it. You got to eat all of it. You can't leave anything left. Anything left you got to dispose of a certain way. You got to eat in a hurry. You got to eat dressed for travel. So, sorry folks, sitting in your PJs in front of your TV is not how you were able to eat this meal. A lot of details here, isn't it? A lot of details. Which also is one of the things that should tell us is when God sets out how He wants it matters. How He wants it matters. Moses goes on to explain the elements, procedure, and reasons for the Passover meal and its protective significance in relation to the 10th plague. You're to eat this meal to commemorate the blood is on the door so that the angel of death passes over. All these details, Moses gives them the exact way on what they're to do it. What happens if you don't put the blood on the doorpost? People die. Angel of death will stop at your house. Bring that forward. What happens if we don't put on the blood of Christ to us? We die. Gee, some parallels here. But he's saying there's an exact way to do this. And the be ready, be dressed like you're ready to run. Well, there's an importance theologically note here. There's also a practical note. Because at some point when the Egyptians see what's going on, they're going to come and tell them, get out. You got to be ready to go. You got to be ready to go. The angel of death passing over would be a preview of the manner that God would free all slaves of sin in the future through what was called vicarious atonement. Through the blood of the lambs they sacrificed, death passed over them. The vicarious atonement for us is through blood of the sacrifice of the perfect lamb for us. Death passes over us. This is a foretelling. All right, let's go to Exodus 12 now, beginning of verse 14, as we continue on here. It says, "This day is to be a memorial for you, and you must celebrate it as a festival to the Lord. You are to celebrate it throughout your generations as a permanent statute. You must eat unleavened bread for 7 days. On the first day, you must remove yeast from your houses. Whoever eats what is leavened from the first day throughout the 7th day must be cut off from Israel. You are to hold a sacred assembly on the first day and another sacred assembly on the 7th day. No work may be done on those days except for preparing what you people need to eat. You may only do that. You are to observe the festival of unleavened bread, because on this very day I brought your military divisions out of the land of Egypt. You must observe this day throughout your generations as a permanent statute. You are to eat unleavened bread in the first month, from the evening of the 14th day of the month until the evening of the 21st day. Yeast must not be found in your houses for 7 days. If anyone eats something leavened, that person, whether a resident alien or native of the land, must be cut off from the community of Israel. Do not eat anything leavened. Eat unleavened bread in all your homes." Anybody eat a bunch of unleavened bread? Don't say. No head nods here. What is the thing about unleavened bread? Doesn't have yeast. You have to wait on it? Yeah. So what do you think the big purpose here is of unleavened bread and not having yeast? Not having any yeast in the house. Yeah. You have no time to wait. Just that's a lot, detail. But, no yeast. He explains other observances that they will keep in the future, that they will accompany the Passover meal when they celebrate it as a yearly commemoration. There's going to be more to it than just this meal going forward. But to begin that calendar, this is it. And he goes through all those details of having no leaven. Then we'll go forward now to verse 21. Verse 21, it begins, "Then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, 'Go select an animal from the flock according to your families and slaughter the Passover animal. Take a cluster of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and brush the lintel and the 2 doorposts with some of the blood in the basin. None of you may go out in the door of the house until morning. When the Lord passes through to strike Egypt and sees the blood on the lintel and the 2 doorposts, he will pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter your houses to strike you. Keep this command permanently as a statute for you and your descendants when you enter the land that the Lord will give you as he promised. You are to observe this ceremony. When your children ask you, 'What does this ceremony mean to you?' you are to reply, 'It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, for he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians and he spared our homes.' So the people knelt low and worshiped. Then the Israelites went and did this. They did just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron." So, in the section before this, it talked about when they were looking for the animal was to be what? Without blemish. Without blemish, yeah. What, a perfect lamb sacrifice. Again, Jesus, for our sacrifice, was a perfect lamb. Here, as we go through all of these preparations, and he says this will be, going forward, it will be a thing to remind you, talking about the Passover meal. What is our remembrance ceremony that we do? We do it every week. Lord's Supper. This Passover was to be a remembrance of them, of how God passed them over and set them free from slavery. The Lord's Supper is our remembrance of what God did for us, what Jesus did for us, and how death passes us over, and we remember the sacrifice He made as the perfect lamb for our sins. Moses recounts how the Jews followed his instructions concerning the Passover meal, with the elders beginning to make the first preparations. They got to get everything ready. This has to be done and ready for that night. And so they begin to make the preparations. Moses also explains how to use this sacred meal to teach future generations about how God freed the people from slavery by the power of the 10th plague. Let me ask you a question here, just a little deviation here. What becomes the problem with where they go with this eventually? And it became part of the problem with the religious leaders in Judaism. They become more focused on what? There you go, Sandra. They become more focused on the details of doing the event than the remembrance of the event. They get worried about, I got to get all the yeast out. This thing has to be perfect. Everything has to be done a certain way, and they forget the why. We have to be careful that sometime in the Lord's Supper, we don't get caught up in the same way, don't we? It can get real easy sometimes to just go through the motion of take the bread, take the cup. Okay, I've met my standards. Without remembering the why. And so going down the road in Judaism, they will get caught, and not just this, a whole lot of things, they'll get caught up in the legalistic of doing it to the letter without the understanding of the why. We as Christians need to learn from that lesson and not get caught up necessarily in doing everything by the letter, but understanding the why. Understanding the why and the importance. The children would learn how only the firstborn of the Egyptians were taken, but the Israelites who obeyed God were saved and free. Now, we don't know, it doesn't tell us, but if there were Israelites who did not put the blood on their doorpost, what do we understand happened? Best we understand, the angel of death did not pass them by. So I think the statement here that the Israelites who obeyed God were saved and freed. If they obeyed God. Has anything changed thousands of years later? Or does it still matter that we obey God? All right, then we get to the 10th plague, the actual occurrence of what happens here. Beginning of verse 29. Now at midnight the Lord struck every firstborn male in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in that dungeon, and every firstborn of the livestock. During the night Pharaoh got up, he along with all his officials and all the Egyptians, and there was a loud wailing throughout Egypt because there wasn't a house without someone dead. He summoned Moses and Aaron during the night and said, "Get out immediately from among my people, both you and the Israelites, and go worship the Lord as you have said. Take even your flocks and your herds as you ask, and leave, and also bless me." Now the Egyptians pressured the people in order to send them quickly out of the country, for they said, "We are all going to die." So the people took their dough before it was leavened, with their kneading bowls wrapped up in their clothes on their shoulders. The Israelites acted on Moses' word and asked the Egyptians for silver and gold items for clothing. And the Lord gave the people such favor with the Egyptians that they gave them what they requested. In this way, they plundered the Egyptians. So we see the 10th plague now hit the nation of Egypt. Have you ever wondered what it sounded like that night? Have you ever thought what it sounded like that night to have walked out in the streets of Egypt? And it tells us here in Scripture that how many houses in Egypt of Egyptians were spared? None. Just imagine this, Hopkinsville is a decent-sized city, but not like probably this place of Egypt would have been at this time. But imagine walking out in the streets of Hopkinsville if something like this had happened. And the wailing and the noise that you would hear. And now in this days, you'd hear sirens, you'd hear ambulances, you'd hear all kinds of things going on. Imagine here, people running into the street going, my son is dead, my husband is dead, my father is dead, my grandfather is dead. All the noise, all the wailing. This would have been a loud night of pain. And there would have been no house spared, even the house of Pharaoh. Pharaoh, who viewed himself as God, is all-powerful, and now he had something happen in his house that he could do nothing about. Imagine. And Pharaoh's reaction now to what goes on, Pharaoh says what? Go away. Just go away. Now, he said that before, and he said, well, I'll let you go. Okay, you'll do this. But he really wasn't meaning it. When Pharaoh says, go away this time, do you think he means it? You think he means it? Pharaoh's at a point now, leave. Leave. Go away. They've been damaged food. Their plants and everything are damaged. Their livestock now is damaged. The nation has suffered a massive people loss. Pharaoh just goes, get out of here. Just go. I don't want you around, don't need you around. Leave Egypt. And do it when? Did he tell them, wait till sunrise tomorrow and get out? What did he say? Go now. God had told Moses to tell him to be ready. Because he told him, Pharaoh's going to tell you to leave. And he's going to tell you to leave now. Yeah. Male, I believe earlier it talked male. Tammy, you'd cut me off. I'd have to look back, but I believe earlier it had mentioned male.
Translation just says
Firstborn. And I may be off track. I've seen male somewhere. Pete's nodding with me there too. But this is a devastating incident. And again, finally Pharaoh has just said, done. Firstborn son. Just carried over. And Moses is writing here, assuming you read the earlier part. So Pharaoh tells him, go. Go, and go now. I'm tired. And he tells him what as he goes? He doesn't say, leave me a few people behind. He says, take what? Take all your people. Take your flocks and your herds. Leave immediately and go worship your God. Pharaoh couldn't find a picture of Yul Brynner anywhere with this kind of look, but Pharaoh's saying, go. Just go. But here's an odd one for you. What does Pharaoh also say? Bless me also. He's throwing them out of the country. He's done everything he could to keep them there. And Pharaoh says, this is an odd one. Bless me also. Pharaoh hadn't believed in the God of Israel. Pharaoh's viewed himself as higher than anything. And now Pharaoh says, bless me also. Okay, it's a little not getting Pharaoh's logic here. Commentators like Ellicott's commentary note that this phrase represents the absolute lowest point of Pharaoh's humiliation. In other words, God at this point has set Pharaoh in his place. God has looked at Pharaoh and said, you ain't all that. You ain't all that. Yet again, it will soon appear that Pharaoh may have just been saying anything to get out of the moment. He's done that before, and maybe in the pain of this moment, he's just trying to say, I leave, bless me, get out of here, and go. Because what does he do here not far down the road? He goes after him. But right now, Pharaoh's in pain, his people are in pain, his nation's a wreck, and he's just like, go. He'll have time to think about it, and he'll think, no, I didn't want to do that. And then the chilling silence of Moses. Because when Pharaoh says, bless me also, what does Moses say? What does Moses say? One of the most profound observations made by modern theologians and Jewish commentators is what happens next. After Pharaoh says, bless me also, Moses does nothing. Now you remember, when Pharaoh goes and asks for relief from all the other plagues, Moses does what? He goes to God and says, please relieve this plague. Pharaoh's going to let us go. Please alleviate and pass this over. Be done with it. When Pharaoh goes to Moses and says, bless me also, Moses says nothing. Moses doesn't say, I'll ask the Lord to bless you. Moses say, I will speak on your behalf. Moses does nothing. Nothing. In earlier plagues, when Pharaoh asked Moses to pray for him, the Bible explicitly states that Moses went out and interceded. Scripture records absolutely no response from Moses. Moses doesn't lay hands on him, he doesn't pray for him, and he doesn't offer a blessing based on what's written in Scripture. And who do we believe wrote Exodus? Moses. So if Moses had done something like that, you figure he might have jotted that down as a victory note. But it doesn't say anything. Silence at this point. Nothing. And we are about 1 minute away, so we'll stop there and pick up next week.